Hi, everybody. This is Jonathan from Mnemonic, and we're going to get started in just a minute. We're going to give 2 or 3 minutes for more folks to join. I hope you can see my camera. We're going to switch over to the slides as soon as a few more people are here. I see the count of attendees keeps going up. We got people from all over the world in different industries. So thank you so much for joining us this morning or afternoon, depending where you are today. Very excited to talk about continuous compliance and embedding compliance into your operations. So if you need a coffee, go grab one real quick. And I think in 2 minutes, we're going to get started. So we're just going to let a few people set up and go to webinar, and then we'll be on our way. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll connect in just 30 seconds to 1 minute. Thank you. Okay, great. Jessica, would you like to kick it off this morning with a little bit of an intro, and then I'll take it from there.
Absolutely, Jonathan. So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this webinar today. The topic today is continuous compliance. This is the fourth in a series of compliance webinars we have been doing over the past few months. It's because at Mnemonic, we honestly believe that if we respect just the regulatory rules and regulations, our workplaces would be much safer and our employees much happier and productive. But at the same time, we realize that compliance, unfortunately, is very complex, and even the largest of the companies struggle to stay in compliance. So with these compliance webinars, we're just hoping to share compliance best practices with companies big and small. We do not discuss Mnemonic's products in these webinars, but if you're interested in Mnemonic on how we can help you improve your compliance, you can view our brochure in the handout section, or you can even visit mnemonic.com and get in touch. It would be great if you can show us support by following us on LinkedIn. This way, you will even receive notifications for our upcoming webinars. Coming back to the topic today, if you have any questions, please feel free to send them at any time using the chat of the GoToWebinar panel, but please know that we will address all the questions at the end of the presentation. Also, when you exit the webinar at any point in time, you will see us away. There are just 3 to 4 questions. Will take you less than 30 seconds to answer, but they go a long way in helping us improve our future webinars. So that's about it for the introduction. Our speaker today is Jonathan. I'll let Jonathan do his own introduction. Over to you, Jonathan.
Great, thank you, Jessica. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for helping put together the webinar today. So very excited to have everybody here. I think we saw 1 or 2 questions about people being muted. So the way we do the webinars, just so everybody's on the same page, is we do mute all the attendees because of background noise and things like that. And if you have a question, or if there's a point you'd like me to clarify or go on into more detail, just put that into the chat window or the question window in GoToWebinar. And as Jessica said, we'll address that at the end of the webinar. Our goal is to end on time at 11 a.m. today, so the webinar should last about 35 minutes. And afterwards, we'll have about 20 minutes for Q&A. So thanks again, everybody, for joining. I'm now going to turn off the webcam, and we'll switch back to just the slides. And if you are interested in getting the slides and the video, please let Jessica know at the exit survey. And that exit survey, the more feedback we get, the better. We're always trying to get more feedback about how we can improve the webinars and what topics you would be interested in. Of course, within the world of compliance, please don't put topics around something that's completely different. Might be interesting, but we're really focused on compliance here at Mnemonic. So I'm going to shut off my camera, and we'll go into these slides. Okay, great. So hopefully everybody can see my screen. You should see a slide that says continuous compliance, embedding compliance into your operations. If you don't see this, please pop a message into the chat window, but hopefully everybody can see this. So just very briefly about myself, I'm the president founder of Mnemonic. By training, I'm a metallurgical engineer. So I worked in mines, I worked in steel foundries, and then I made a switch into EHS and into compliance about 10 years ago. After working in China for about a year for an Italian metallurgical company, I saw some pretty crazy EHS issues and compliance issues in China on steel factories there. This was back in the early 2000s, and I came back to Canada, where I'm from, and I said, I should really do something about these EHS problems. And since then, the company has grown. We actually have an office in Shanghai, and we're helping hundreds of Chinese companies improve their EHS performance. So very, very passionate about keeping workers safe, keeping the environment safe, and keeping operational excellence as high as possible. And really, we at Mnemonic really love building easy to use software. I'd say that's the other big element here is we want to do compliance, but we also want to offer you easy to use tools, because nobody wants to use a tool that's tremendously frustrating to use. That's a bit about me. So why are we doing this webinar today? Our goal is really to help you move your compliance program from pieces of paper or Word and Excel to something that's more comprehensive and that can actually be used in practice in your daily operations. Too often we see companies set up management systems and compliance programs that look nice on paper, but they then sit on a shelf or they sit in a folder on some computer and they never really get put into practice. And so today we're going to talk about some of the challenges and benefits of putting that compliance program, embedding it in your operations, getting organizational buy-in, and demonstrating the value of ongoing proactive compliance. And our view of EHS and compliance, and we could broaden this to not just be EHS, but HR, finance, all sorts of operational challenges, is that compliance is the foundation. We still see too many companies that jump right into management systems. So they jump right into complex IoT detection systems and try to do trend analysis and all these fancy things that can be buzzwords a little bit. Every year we see some buzzwords around EHS or quality. But our big belief at Mnemonic is you start with the basics. And the basics is compliance. Compliance to regulations, compliance to standards, compliance to corporate requirements. And if you can master that, and that's really hard, if you can master that, then you can start building up on top of that. You can build other programs, you can build more sophisticated things. But if you don't have a strong compliance program in place, do you really have an EHS management system? It's maybe a bit of a philosophical question, but I think it's a valid one. And so what we want to help you and other organizations do is move from lagging indicators to leading indicators, move from being a reactive organization when it comes to compliance to being proactive, and really embedding compliance into your overall EHS strategy. So that's the goal today. I do want to mention that this webinar today is part of a larger suite of webinars and conferences that we've been doing over the last few years. The three most recent ones are 7 Steps to Comprehensive Compliance. And by the way, all of this is available on our website free of charge, both the videos and the slides. But we talked about 7 steps to comprehensive compliance, and part of that will be repeated today. 4 key types of regulations, which honestly I think is super interesting. It's how the regulators are changing the way they're writing regulations. And so that's available on our website. They're moving away from prescriptive, very detail-oriented regulations to more objective and performance-based regulations. So please have a look at that. And then the not-so-hidden costs of non-compliance. It's a bit of a mouthful, but as you can imagine, we discussed industrial accidents that destroyed companies, killed people, had environmental damage, had quality issues, and had tremendous costs for the organization. And our argument there is that becoming a proactive compliance organization will save you money over the long term and make you a better organization. So before we dive into today's talk, I just want to have a very quick poll. Which Mnemonic webinars have you attended? So I just want to get a sense of the people that are on today's webinar, how many of you have been to one of our previous webinars, and gives me a sense of the background information you may have about Mnemonic. So let me see what is coming in. I see the polls are now coming in. So I see 35% of people have been to our 7 steps for comprehensive compliance. 33% saw the 4 key types of regulations, and 43% saw the not so hidden costs of non-compliance. So very happy to see that we have so many repeat webinar attendees. It must mean we're doing something right. And for those of you that missed some of those webinars due to scheduling or what have you, don't hesitate to go grab them on the website. I think they're beneficial in many ways. Okay, great. Thank you so much for answering that poll. So our agenda today, again, we're going to try and do this in under 40 minutes. And we're going to talk very briefly about non-compliance risks. We're then going to talk very briefly about compliance challenges. And then we're going to move into the core of today's discussion, which is continuous compliance, how to embed compliance into your operations, and then that Q&A at the end. So non-compliance risks. Some of you who've been to the seven steps to comprehensive compliance will have seen this before, but I just want to repeat it because I think repeating these risks, both to webinar attendees and then hopefully you can repeat them or turn them into valuable information for your internal communication. One thing I've learned running mnemonic over the years is that you have to repeat. You say something and you think you say it clearly, but of course people are inundated with information. People are busy. And so I think repeating the core message is critical. And the core message, in our opinion, is that non-compliance is expensive. It's not just expensive, it's dangerous, risky, and has no place in a modern business. So accidents, workplace accidents, incidents, penalties and fines, reputational damage, product delays, and businesses being completely shut down or regulated out of business. In our opinion, these are the 5 main risks of non-compliance. And I know you can already visualize all the costs associated with this. So penalties, very briefly, penalties basically keep going up every year. This is no surprise. And I was at a conference last week, the North American Environmental Managers Conference in Toronto. It moves around every year. Fantastic conference. If you're interested in it, it happens every year. And I think next year is in Fort Worth, Texas. But one of the interesting discussions at this conference was that in the US, at least, because certain agencies have had reduced budgets like the EPA and OSHA, and then some of the state agencies, what has happened is that the agencies are actually doing more enforcement. They're applying more penalties because the fines and penalties that they issue, they collect. So for them, it's a revenue center. And a number of American companies or companies with US operations were mentioning how they were getting more inspections, more fines and penalties by the agencies who had their budgets cut at the federal level. So really interesting, the news is always talking about how the current US administration has reduced environmental protection, but in counterpart, the agencies are actually applying the regulations more so they can collect the revenues. And if you're in the US or if you have US operations, I'm kind of curious to know if this anecdote I heard at the conference is accurate. So feel free to just kind of type into the window, yes, we've seen an increase in inspections, or perhaps no, you haven't seen an increase in inspections. So just kind of curious to get some sample data here if you're in the US. Another big thing that you've probably seen over the years is that the penalties, criminal liability for non-compliance for health and safety and environmental issues is increasing. This is a trend around the world. In the US, there's a few examples here. In Canada, we see this in China, in Europe. There's more and more criminal proceedings for non-compliance. And this is, of course, a big concern for directors, business owners, people that have high levels of responsibility. And if you're trying to make a business case internally with your C-suite, with your management, I would say criminal liability is usually a pretty big motivator. So you might want to mention this. Penalties, as we mentioned, keep going up every year. This is in the US, but we do see this trend around the world. And then reputational damage. So of course, you know that if you have an explosion, if you have incidents, if you have non-compliance, this can harm your stock price, can harm the value of the company, whether you're publicly traded or not. But what was interesting in this graph, this analysis that was done, was that if you have a robust EHS, or in this case, environmental management system, the reputational damage of bad news around environment is actually less. And I thought that was really interesting, where companies that had robust systems in place were able to recover more quickly. They were able to address problems, and companies that didn't have that ended up spending more time scrambling and trying to repair the damage. Market access and product delays. as companies are going more global, it's more and more important to be tracking compliance around your products. And that's something that Mnemonic is doing more and more work on, is tracking regulations that limit what kind of products, what kind of chemicals, what kind of things can be introduced to different markets. One simple example is that a German automotive parts company in China had to shut down due to non-compliance with Chinese regulations. And as you know, in the car industry, with on-time delivery or just-in-time delivery of parts, this affected 200 car models and 49 makers. And we can imagine that the customers of this German automotive parts company were not happy when they had to stop their assembly lines because their supplier had non-compliance. So evaluating compliance in your supply chain and for your products, super critical. Regulated business, basically in certain jurisdictions, they are just shutting down industries, they're shutting down companies, they're putting in place stronger and stronger regulations, and we see this all around the world. There's one example from China, and then a citation or a reg in Quebec. So that's a little bit the risks that we see around non-compliance, and I just wanted to repeat that because I think it's a core message that you can deliver to your colleagues and to your management. Compliance challenges. When we're talking with potential customers or existing customers, one thing we often hear about, why haven't they put in place more robust compliance programs? It's a mix of these different elements. Sometimes they've built a great program. Maybe they use consultants, maybe they did it internally, but they didn't build it with sustainability in mind. And sustainability, when I'm talking about sustainability, I'm talking about the ability to keep it up to date, keep it relevant with the organization, implement it, improve it, not sort of the environmental sustainability. So making sure that your programs are sustainable and manageable is really critical. Reduced workforce. We hear about cuts all the time, companies trying to operate with less staff to increase profit margins. And so a lot of EHS departments, a lot of compliance and regulatory affairs departments are frankly understaffed. Increasing demand, so there's more and more demand from the government side with more regulations. There's also increasing demand from your customers, your stakeholders, and investors. A big trend right now is investors, pension funds, mutual funds are asking for more and more evidence of compliance of robust EHS programs. And then poor processes. Is very hard to do compliance if your operational processes and procedures are not robust. Sporadic improvements, so sometimes you hire somebody new, the management changes and they'll make an improvement to the compliance program, but it's sporadic, it's not structural, and it doesn't last for the long term. And then lack of resources, so just not having enough cash to purchase systems, implement systems, deploy systems. And then lastly, a big challenge that we've heard over and over again is lack of support from other departments. Compliance is still viewed as a cost rather than an investment. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in today's webinar. Okay, so that was our introduction. It's about 10:20, and we got about 20 minutes left to go through the core today. So how to achieve continuous compliance. And I don't want to pretend that we're going to give you the solution today, because every company needs to address this differently, and it's an ongoing, very complex challenge. But let me just ask a very quick question to everybody on the call today. Do you feel that your company has a reactive approach to compliance or a proactive approach to compliance? And I'm sure it's not binary. It's not one or the other. You're probably somewhere in the middle. But if you had to choose one, which one would you choose? Are you reacting to audit findings? Are you reacting to problems, to incidents? Or are you getting ahead of the curve, doing proactive inspections, doing proactive training of your staff on compliance, and really minimizing those lagging indicators? So let's just have a look at this poll and see what people are saying. All right, so far 60%, 65% of people are saying that their organizations are still reactive, and 40% are proactive. So it's not so bad. 40% is pretty good. But that 60%, of course, we want to help you move away from reactive to proactive. So thank you for answering that poll. And that's, I'd say, somewhat similar to what we hear in the industry. And it's a big challenge. I mean, I don't want to kid anybody that this is easy. So yeah, I mean, I think for those 60% of people that still have a reactive compliance approach, compliance programs, if you have one at all, tend to be built out in a sort of progressive and chaotic manner. So you have an audit either from corporate or external. You get a government inspection, you have some sort of other issues, and then you start implementing process, procedures, training, things like that to try and kind of patch those holes. Or corporate initiatives, customer requests, or customer comes in. We've heard this, say you're an electronic parts supplier, you're supplying to Apple. Apple has very strict sort of EHS requirements, and they force that down on their supply chain. So we see this not just in the electronics industry, but lots of industries. So reacting to customer requests and corporate initiatives. So if you're in a big company, corporate initiatives sometimes they get pushed down all the way to the facility level. So this is typical reactive behavior. And our goal today is to talk a little bit about how to move away from this to proactive behavior. Now, if there's one slide I would like you to retain from today's presentation, it's this one. In my mind, and in our perspective at Mnemonic, is that if you can accomplish this, you've solved the vast majority of your compliance, EHS, and quality problems. And so it's really 3 points here. What are your requirements? What actions do you need to take? And how do you verify that the actions are being taken and that the actions are having the desired compliance effect? Now we can talk about EHS management systems and ISO and all these different really great systems. But if we distill everything down, if we say, after all is said and done, how do we make sure that we're in compliance? It's what are my requirements? Like that's step one. If you don't know what you're required to do based on regulations, codes, standards, corporate requirements, permitting conditions, stakeholder engagements. So if you don't know what your requirements are, you're never going to be in compliance. But what are your requirements? What actions do you need to take to meet those requirements? That's step two. And then when it comes to verification, you really want to verify two things. You want to verify that the actions that you've identified are being taken by the right people at the right time. And then you want to ensure that those actions are having the desired compliance effect. It is possible that you determine, you identify an action to meet a requirement, but when the action is actually put into operation, when the people are actually trying to do it, it doesn't necessarily have that compliance effect that you're looking for. So you want to really do two types of audits there is, are we doing the actions and are the actions having the desired compliance effect? So really, if I had to summarize EHS to somebody who's never heard about it or summarize compliance to somebody who's never heard about it, I would say these three things. What are your requirements? What actions do you need to take? How do you verify the actions are being taken and that they're having the desired compliance effect? So if you want to print this out and stick it on your wall, you can do an acronym, RAV, requirements, actions, verification. I'm sure you can think of another acronym, maybe that would be helpful for your organization. But it's all about keep it simple, stupid. Don't overcomplicate this stuff. It's really give me a list of my requirements, give me a list of actions, and let's have a verification system. So one of the key challenges that we see is that organizations will set lofty goals in all respects, but let's just talk about compliance. They'll set lofty goals, and then they'll try and achieve those goals with the systems, the organization that they have. Whereas in an ideal situation, you would say, okay, what are our objectives? What are our compliance objectives? Do we have the resources to do this? Do we have the right people in place in terms of skill sets? And do we have an organizational structure where we're going to be reporting compliance up the ladder and be taking this seriously? Does we have management buy-in? Is there a senior VP or board member that's going to be looking at compliance? So you want to look at these three things. Do we have the internal resources to do this? If not, you got to go and try and get those resources. And I know that's really not easy. Do we have the right people in the right roles? And then do we have the organizational structure that's going to force us to take this seriously? But in my opinion, if you can achieve, if you go through this analysis, it will allow you to determine whether or not your objectives are realistic. And so getting more resources is very challenging. And compliance is still viewed as a cost center. But I want to make one analogy that hopefully will help you make the business case internally. So the three main areas where we feel you can achieve financial benefit from compliance is avoiding delays on projects and products being introduced into market, helps you drive compliance programs, help you drive buy-in of your staff when they can see that, oh, we're doing this action. We're doing this item, this process, this procedure because of this compliance requirement, either corporate, regulatory standards. It helps drive that buy-in. It makes it easier to convince people to do what you're asking them to do. And then establishing expectations with staff and contractors. We were just talking to one company the other day who had hired sort of the lowest cost contractor for a project, and surprise, surprise, the contract went off the rails, over budget, and the contractor had all sorts of health and safety issues. So having a robust compliance program for your supply chain, for your on-site contractors, as well as your suppliers, really helps you filter out a lot of companies that will create more problems than solutions. And the analogy that I like to offer to our customers is compliance is a lot today. Compliance is a lot like how quality was viewed in the 1970s. So in the 1970s, especially in the automotive industry, people associated quality with high cost. That if you want to produce a higher quality car, it had to be a higher priced car. And then lean manufacturing from Japan really flipped this on its head, because what they figured out was that if you solve quality issues at their source, before they get off the production line, you actually leads to a decrease in production costs. So by solving the quality up front, by making no compromises on quality at any time, they were able to reduce the cost of producing cars. They were able to get a much bigger market share because people wanted to buy their cars. And the US big three, Chrysler, GM, and Ford, never recovered. And this is in the US, never mind other automotive markets around the world. So if you're talking to operations people, if you're talking to management, the analogy I like to make is think about lean manufacturing and how that flipped quality on its head, and companies that did not adapt to that disappeared or lost significant market share. And the companies that thrived were the ones that embraced the concept of fixing quality at the source. So today, this is the 7 steps of comprehensive compliance that we covered earlier this year. Today, we're focusing really on 3 elements. So number 1, which is identifying your requirements. Talked already a little bit about that. Number 3, implementing processes and procedures inside your organization, both with subject matter experts as well as operators. And then some verification tools to make sure that you are really implementing the compliance throughout your organization. And it's not just regulations. Mnemonic is specialized in processing regulations and industry standards, but we also load in for our customers permitting requirements, corporate requirements, customer requirements. You have requirements coming at you from all directions, and it's really tough because if you're an auto parts supplier to one of the, you're a tier 1 and you're supplying to one of the big guys, you got to make sure you're in compliance with all the standards from Ford, GM, Chrysler, BMW, etc., as well as all the regulatory requirements, as well as your permitting requirements. It's a lot of stuff. And so what we try to do is get all of this into one location. And you don't need to use mnemonic. This is not a sales pitch. You can do this in Excel. I mean, you really can. And we actually encourage you to do it first in Excel. Try to gather all of your documents that have requirements in one location. And just that is a huge, huge challenge. I'm just going to pop up the question. Okay, great. So I was just looking at the questions coming in. Let's go back to the slides here. All right, so once you've identified all of your requirements, and that's a big job, don't get me wrong, it's not something you do easily. We were talking to one pharmaceutical company recently who did this exercise for their whole global operations, and I think they came out with an average of 1,300 requirements per site. And this was just for EHS. We're not even talking about the pharmaceutical side. So 1,300 requirements per site was their average number. So it's a lot of work, and we can help you do that much more efficiently, but you can certainly do it on your own, and you can hire consultants. But there is software out there that helps you do this much faster. But once you've identified requirements, you then need to identify the processes and procedures you already have in place, because you probably are already addressing a lot of these requirements, per PPE, the classic stuff, PPE, lockout, tagout, labeling, etc. I'm sure you already have processes and procedures for a good chunk of the requirements, but there's definitely gaps. I mean, I don't think any company in the world would say that they have no gaps. So you want to map your processes, map your requirements, and then you want to try and stick them together. And this is a very super simplistic example where You obviously have requirements for PPE and safety regulations, and you certainly have process and actions. It comes back to that, remember, requirements, actions, verification. What are the actions we're taking? We certainly have issuance of PPE to staff and contractors, as well as other training material. So probably PPE you're covered. Maybe on management of used oil, you actually have contradictory process or procedures. You have different process and procedures for your contractors as well as your on-site staff, or different procedures based on the amount of used oil you're dealing with. So there's a chance you have contradictory procedures and processes. And then, of course, you'll probably identify some requirements where there's nothing in place. Maybe office lighting, for example. There are lots of standards that you'll want to look at for office lighting to make sure your staff have good luminosity, I think that's the word. And you might not have a process for that. That might not be part of your systems. So in terms of implementing a process with your subject matter experts, it's about figuring out what process do we have, what are requirements, what are our gaps. And of course, this is very high level. I know the devil is in the details, but it's taking a structured approach. Requirements, actions, verification. So coming back to actions, you want to link those. So once you've done your kind of gap analysis, you want to link compliance actions, prioritize linking compliance obligations to existing processes. Nobody wants more procedures, more processes, or at least the workers don't, the operators don't want more. So take the existing stuff you have and link in the compliance obligations. Say, oh, we already have this process for PPE. Well, that's actually linked to this safety regulation in this jurisdiction, or it's linked to this standard. So start by doing that. Once you've done that, then try and identify where are we missing processes, and then try and write the process or the procedure, the SOP, based on current practices, if possible. So if your current practice is in compliance, even though you might not have taken a compliance first approach, start by creating processes that already reflect what you're doing. It's less change, it's less training, it's less sort of work, basically. And then align those with your compliance obligations, and then obviously keep those up to date as things change. And then the third point here is make sure you develop robust training and communication around these compliance obligations and actions. As I said earlier, the key to buy-in is repetition. I was actually reading this morning, I think it was the CEO of AMD, which is the microprocessor company, talking that you have to repeat something 75 times to get people to really understand it, and then repeat it another 75 times. So you gotta have robust training and communication around why are we doing these actions? What is the compliance obligation? Why is it important to the organization? And so that's this kind of pyramid that you might be familiar with. So it's all the way at the top. You sometimes you would see policies, so you can have policies at the top of your pyramid. But I like to say, let's look at, we can have another pyramid, which is what are the requirements? What are the documents? Why are we doing this? Well, it's, NFPA standard X. Who, when, and where. So what's the action we need to take? Who needs to take that action? How are they going to take that action? And then what's the evidence that you want them to provide in terms of once they do that action? That comes back to the verification piece that we talked about. So we talk a lot about safety culture. We see this all the time, and safety culture is important. I don't want to say that it's not important, but what we really believe in at Mnemonic, and what I think successful organizations do, is they have compliance culture. And culture, at the end of the day, is an outcome of our actions. That is, if we change our actions, we change our culture. And getting people to change their actions is really hard. And that's why it's so critical to take a structured approach where you're going from compliance obligation documents, raw laws, regulations, corporate policies, stakeholders, etc., turning those into actions. And if you can get people to change their actions, you're going to change their culture. And so that's really what we emphasize with all of our colleagues around the world. And compliance culture, in our opinion, is a core part of operational excellence. If your company doesn't have a strong compliance culture, you're going to constantly have deviations, you're going to constantly have issues with staff, and you just won't be able to get ahead of the curve. And if you have a compliance culture, this cuts across EHS. It goes into finance, HR, all sorts of stuff. So getting compliance culture right at your organization is absolutely critical to operational excellence. You can also have safety culture. we definitely encourage that. But safety culture only addresses certain parts of the safety puzzle. Whereas compliance culture, if you really get that right, I think you're going to solve the vast majority of your safety and environmental issues. Just the other day, I was at home and they're doing construction across the street on an apartment building, and the people were on the roof. I should have put a photo in the slide deck. I forgot. But the people on the roof were doing roofing and some corrections. They weren't wearing harnesses, and they're about 6 stories up. I mean, these guys were in serious safety risk. I took a photo actually, and I tweeted it to the local, or the governmental agency here where I live in Montreal that takes care of this. They tweeted back to me, and I reported it. But safety culture, is getting those guys on the roof to wear their harness at all times, even if sometimes it's a little bit inconvenient. That's where you're at. Because when it's like 5 construction guys on their own, safety culture can only take you so far. So you need to have compliance-driven culture. And then another big challenge of compliance is that organizations are still very siloed. So you have EHS teams, you have HR teams, you have operations teams, and they each kind of try and put in place their own systems. And one of the main challenges we've seen at Mnemonic is compliance issues that are in a gray zone. It's not clear, are they EHS? Are they operational? Are they something else? And we have this discussion all the time with our customers. So just one example that we found really interesting is that a rail company that has operations in Illinois in the US, they found out through the news that you now had to have 2 people on all freight trains at all times in Illinois. This was up from 1 person. This is a recent regulation a couple months ago. And the question was, is that EHS? I mean, there is a safety element, of course. Being able to stop the train is a public safety element. There might be an occupational health and safety element where 2 people, if somebody passes out or has an accident, the other person's there to help. But is it operational? Is it EHS? Is it HR? Not clear. And that's why it's so critical to have a centralized compliance program, because if not, stuff like this slips through the cracks. It'll slip right between the EHS silo and the operational silo. And then they'll get an inspection, and then they'll get a fine, and then they'll be reactive. And so I thought this was a great example, because I'm sure we could have a long discussion about whether or not this is EHS, operational, or something else. And compliance is not just about what you need to do. So in the previous case, having 2 people on a freight train, it's also about what you're not allowed to do. And so one simple example is that in most jurisdictions, staff cannot obstruct an audit or inspector from the government when they're on site investigating a spill or an incident. And so getting your staff, your operations to know what I have to do, what are the actions I have to take, but also what are the actions I'm not allowed to take. I mean, that's just as important as the actions I do have to take. And then another kind of compliance challenge on operations is time-sensitive compliance. So construction projects, which are obviously being built over time, sometimes they're near wetlands, and this is just one example. And during wetlands, you can only do certain types of operations during certain times of the year when the wetland is drained and dry and things like that. And on a construction project, as I'm sure everybody's aware, you often have many companies involved, and getting them all on the same page is super hard. And then if you add on to it a time factor where you say, well, our permit only allows us to do construction in this part of the construction area at this part of the year, and if we don't do it then, it delays the whole project. So you need to manage not just compliance, but also compliance within specific times. And this also has, for sites that are in remote areas where there's maybe some weather constraints, you need to take that in consideration. So you got to have, what are the actions we need to take, but when can we take them and when can we not take them? Those are all important questions you need to bake into your compliance program. And my last example that I found really interesting was that in Montreal, there's a new rail system that's going in. And I'm just using this example because it's really near to home. And they're using this design build approach where they don't give detailed specifications to the construction companies. They kind of give objectives. And one of the objectives they gave to their construction companies was that everything you build has to meet NFPA 130 for evacuations during fires. And they awarded the contract to a company. When they went to deliver the modifications to the tunnel system that they built, they realized that it was not compliant to NFPA 130. And so they had not properly evaluated what that meant and how it had to be baked into their design work. So it's a safety incident, of course, a safety issue for passengers of the train. And the cost overruns related to this non-compliance was $130 million. And then there was an argument between the builder and the contract, the company that issued the contract as to who's going to pay this bill. Lawyers are involved, projects delayed, et cetera, et cetera. So going through and identifying your requirements, that's the first step in this. What are the requirements? Capturing NFPA 130 and breaking that down into its individual requirements would have saved them a lot of money and a lot of headaches. And then verifying compliance with audits. So I'd say there's three main types of verifications we like to encourage companies to do. Is, again, remember that identify requirements, actions, and then you got to verify that actions are being taken and that they're having the desired effect. So you got to get compliance to be cultural, and then you got to make sure that the actions are actually being done. So you got to verify, have people bought into the compliance culture? Do people understand the processes that they have to do? Are they doing those processes? Are they taking the actions? And then verifying, does the process have the desired compliance effect? So those are kind of three different types of audits, and you might want to do them with three different people at three different times, because it's very hard to, everybody's biased. And so if you ask somebody, is the process I'm doing, is that having the right effect? Or if it's the person who designed the system. So you kind of want to separate it, silo it out so that you get more objective points of view to know whether or not you have that real buy-in, whether people are doing the process and when the process is having a desired effect. And a lot of this you can do internally. You don't need to outsource it. Of course, hiring an external consultant is great, but nobody knows your operations better than you do. So first party and second party audits, super powerful here for verification. And just kind of wrapping up, last couple slides, we took this pyramid and leading indicators. So in our mind, that base, the foundation of your program should be compliance culture. Do your staff understand their compliance obligations? Does the organization know its compliance obligations? And if you can audit that and identify, hey, this site does not know its compliance obligations, that is a really strong leading indicator. It might not create an incident right away. It might not even create an incident for years. It might never create an incident if you don't know all your obligations. But if you catch that stuff early on, that's a fantastic leading indicator. It's really going to make you much more proactive. And then, the verification around actions, that's also going to help you catch stuff before it turns into incidents. But then when you start catching deviations from process, that's where you got to ask yourself, have we really identified all the requirements? Have we really identified all the actions? And then if you get all the way up to incidents where you have spills or worker safety or fines or penalties, you have a big problem. And so you want to really focus on that compliance culture and the identification of your requirements. If you get that right, this pyramid, the top will be very small and the bottom will be very big. And I'm sure everybody's familiar with the famous Swiss cheese model, but I'll just kind of slightly modify the Swiss cheese model where, the first layer in our mind is that identification of requirements. If you have not identified your requirements, you're unlikely to have implemented actions to meet the requirements, and you're unlikely to have implemented verification tools on those actions, on the impact of the action. So the first hole, I think the Swiss cheese model is probably not the best model, but the first hole actually creates the second hole and creates the third hole and creates the fourth hole, and you have that accident trajectory open right away. And then it's just a question of something happening that the identification of the requirement would have stopped. And so if you don't identify requirements, you don't implement actions, I can guarantee you have a hole in your Swiss cheese model, and then it's just a question of time before something happens. So takeaways, I think I've been repeating the same thing over and over again, hopefully not too much, but it's not that complicated. It's requirements, actions, verifications. Leverage your existing processes and procedures. Don't introduce new stuff until you've done this full mapping. And then make sure you determine the capabilities of your organization and that you can achieve your objectives. There's no point in overloading your staff with crazy amounts of new tasks and work that they frankly just don't have the time to do. So make sure you've analyzed your real capacity and you've mapped your actions to that. And that sometimes requires risk analysis, it requires prioritization, and that can all be done. But you got to take into consideration there's only 24 hours in a day, and there's only so many people who can do so much. So here's a friendly little mini audit. Some questions that I would say you could ask yourself as well as your organization. Do you have a central list of operational procedures? Do you have a central list of compliance obligations, the documents, standards, regs, corporate policies you need to respect? Is compliance part of your employee onboarding process? When you're bringing on new staff, how do you talk about compliance? How do you talk about compliance? And then do your current processes link back to compliance obligations, or are they completely disconnected? Do you have a review mechanism in place for changing compliance obligations? So when the regs change, how are you making sure that gets implemented into operations? And then do you have an assessment of the effectiveness of your compliance actions? And do your directors and C-suite, the VPs, the executives, do they view compliance as a cost or as a driver for operational excellence? I'd say the companies that start implementing programs like this, it's usually because management changed or something happened and management says, hey, we need to really get a proactive compliance program in place. So those are some questions that I'd say if you can answer those, it will give you a good sense of where you're at and what you need to do next. Very briefly about Mnemonic, as I'm sure you know already or you've surmised from this presentation, we're here to help companies respect their compliance obligations, environment, safety, quality, and other issues. We're doing more and more in other spaces like power transmission or finance. But basically, if you have a requirement and you want to track it and you want to embed it in your operations, we can help. We have offices in Montreal and Shanghai, and we have a bunch of tools around managing your compliance obligations, getting regulatory updates, getting updates around standards, generating verification audit protocols, doing your audits on mobile devices, and then rolling all that data together. So really a huge thank you for attending and for your interest in a proactive compliance program. I hope this was helpful. It is high level, but it can be contextualized for your organization. So a big thank you for attending. We will share the slides and videos if you would like. And thank you to Jessica as well for helping prepare this. So if you have questions, please pop those into the chat on the right-hand side of the GoToWebinar system. I think we have about 10 minutes left, 12 minutes left. So we'll try and get through as many questions as possible. And I can stick around a bit longer if we have lots of questions. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for the excellent webinar. I see a few people raising their hands, but I would just say that it's so much easier if you can just type your question in the chat. We don't unmute attendees, so if you can just type your question in the chat, it would be so much easier for us to give it to Jonathan. So we have a question, Jonathan, from a client. She's asking, do the permit regulations from Nancy, do the permit requirements entered in Mnemonic include consultation requirements? And is a separate module from the legal list area?
So specific to our system, we are right now it is a separate list. So if you have a permit that requires you to do consultation, we would load that into a separate module. Over time at Mnemonic, and I don't want to talk too much about the product today, but over time at Mnemonic, we are planning to kind of centralize all of that. So it's all going to be in one list. And then you can link it off to the appropriate people, teams, facilities. Right now it is separate, the permit requirements from the legal and standards-based requirements, but in the next 6 months, it's going to be kind of all filtered into one master list. So if you'd like to work on that, or if that's something you're interested in, let us know, and we will try and help accelerate that for you. But that's definitely the goal, is we want to get all requirements in one location.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think we have another product-related question, but before I ask that, a lot of people are asking for the slides. So please fill in the post-webinar survey, which will be launched as soon as you exit the webinar. There's a question there that asks if you would like to receive the recording and the slides, and please say yes. So that's for the slides. Another question is, how can we manage any federal clients and their complex decentralized compliance systems? I think this relates to mnemonic, I guess. This is from Pierre.
So, I mean, federally regulated companies. I'm not sure if that's what you mean, like companies that are not subject to provincial or state regulations. Of course, it depends on the country, and they're only subject to federal requirements. In a certain sense, it's a lot easier because you don't have to deal with all the local regulations. Yeah, but I'm not 100% sure if that's what you mean. If you're talking about just large companies that have a decentralized compliance approach, that is really tough. I mean, and that's more and more companies. We just did a survey that I think we're going to be sending out soon about, are companies moving away from local compliance programs to global centralized compliance programs? The basic conclusion is yes, they are. I think 40% of companies still kind of decentralize their compliance programs, but there is a trend undoubtedly towards a centralized compliance program as requirements keep increasing every year. And so you got to get that management buy-in, and that's not easy. But if you're a federal operation with facilities all across the country, you got to take the time to identify requirements, get the buy-in, and identify the actions. But I'm not sure I'm fully addressing your questions. I'm not sure I fully understand it. Oh, okay. So he's added, I'm referring to actual federal government departments and agencies regulated under SEPA and federal labor. Yeah. So, I mean, if you're talking about actual federal agencies and getting them to buy into centralized compliance, I don't think I'm the best person to answer that. I just haven't worked a lot with federal agencies. Government has always been a challenge for us to work with, and just in terms of the time and the getting them up and running and getting them to understand this. So I think that's a big challenge, is working with government agencies, getting them to centralize this and to understand the value. But if you have a question, sort of, yeah, okay, great. I see you. You sent us your phone number, so I'm going to have one of our legal people that's really more familiar with the regulatory framework at the federal level in Canada give you a call or an email, and they can discuss that, because they'll be much more knowledgeable than I am.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. So there's a question from Catherine. How do you address this in a smaller organization where EHS is not so much an office, but an individual that has other responsibilities?
Yeah, I think that's a big challenge, where the companies that we've seen implement these robust programs are often very big companies. And why is it only the big companies? I'd say it's two reasons. One, it's cost of doing it. The tools that are out there right now are still quite costly. And then it's having that maturity and saying, we got to tackle this in an organized way. So for a small organization, the simple answer is start small. It's focus on really the high risk activities that you're doing, identify the requirements around that. And there's lots of examples of most of the EHS issues, if in terms of pure numbers, is actually small companies. The big companies tend to do not too bad, but it's all the small companies that don't have robust compliance programs in place that end up having the worker accidents, the spills, the incidents. And if you add them all up, they make a lot of problems. You don't hear about them in the news because they're small. The news loves to talk about Exxon or some company, but really it's the small businesses that are the biggest challenges. So I'd say start small, prioritize. You got to prioritize, pick the high risk activities that you have, and then map the requirements to those activities. And if you want help from Mnemonic, we work with a lot of small companies because we can find some cost savings there with our service. So feel free to contact us. But my short answer is prioritize and do a risk analysis on your operations around compliance. Like where do you risk having huge fines, huge reputational damage, or huge operational challenges? And then identify the requirements, identify the actions, implement a verification program. And then once you show the value of that, you can usually convince management for more resources to do more over time.
Great, thank you, Jonathan.
And if the EHS person has multiple roles, the other angle to this, I would say, is try and get them to do compliance, but not necessarily just EHS. If they also are involved in operations, if they can roll together some product compliance, and other types of compliance with EHS, sometimes that'll be an easier sell for them.
Great. I hope that answers your question. So moving on from Jennifer, we have a question. In organizations with robust QMS, quality management system in place, how might we move toward more proactive compliance that you described?
Yeah, so I think if you have a robust quality, I'm always surprised by companies that have a robust quality management system in place, but don't have a robust compliance program in place. And the pharmaceutical company that I mentioned earlier that built out a very robust compliance program, pharmaceuticals, of course, have a very strong quality management system in place, or else they couldn't get their products onto market and huge impacts for people. So I'm always surprised by that but I'd say if you do have a QMS, you have an even stronger argument around the business case, because you can show them like, look, we put in place this QMS since 20, 30, 40 years ago, and it's helped us stay a viable business and grow. Now, QMS, a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it is about requirements. Are we building the product to spec? Is the product, all the packaging and everything going out the door properly? And so I think it's an easier business case, and you can kind of build off of your QMS. That would be the angle I would take, and really trying to get that buy-in from management, get the buy-in from the quality people to compliance around all subjects, including EHS.
Great. So I have a question from Rutendo. Is this something that can be implemented in the hospitality industry, and how, especially in a company where compliance is regarded as a cost as well as EHS? There's a follow-up question from Rutendo as well. Apparently, compliance is regarded as a standalone department and not integrated into other departments like HR, finance, and operations.
Yeah, so a lot of organizations have an organizational structure problem where compliance is kind of off in the corner somewhere. They like hide them in the basement, and so they obviously don't have a lot of sway in the organization. And when they do try and get buy-in from other silos, other departments, they say, oh, not my problem. So there's an organizational challenge that we see all the time. I don't have a fantastic solution to it. Except with this, you got to get the management to understand that compliance will drive operational excellence. And when we talk about the hospitality industry, that's a tough one as well. I mean, we do work with some companies in the hospitality industry, but I can try and dig up this article I read a while ago about someone talking about the best hotel they'd ever been to, and the best hotel they'd ever been to. They showed up at the hotel. Their room and check-in card was already available. They went into their room, and the room was immaculate. It had been set up properly. At the check-in desk, they had asked them what kind of coffee they liked in the morning, what was their favorite newspaper. That coffee was there in the morning. That newspaper was there in the morning. Now, you could view that as quality management. You could view that as operations, but it's compliance. Like you're saying, when a guest comes in, we want to ask them these questions, and we want to take these actions. And you could potentially verify it. So their cleaning checklist for the bedroom was the person had found it, and basically it had a map of the bedroom and all the different elements that had to be cleaned and done, whether it was tidying up the bed or vacuuming or what have you. And again, that's compliance. I mean, you're saying you got to do all these things, and you got to check them off, and then somebody else comes in and validates that room was properly done. So it's all about requirements, actions, verification. And I think that's equally applicable in the hospitality industry as it is anywhere. In hospitality, the smallest mistake, if you mess up somebody's meal at a restaurant, they never go back, right? It's like the tolerance for error in the hospitality industry is actually really low, which is why the restaurant business is so hard. Of all the businesses you could do, I'd say the restaurant business is really high up on the challenge level. But yeah, it's requirements, actions, verification. You got to reframe compliance that way, and I think you'll get a lot more buy-in.
Thank you, Jonathan. So we have one product related question. Does the Mnemonic support CER, formerly NEB, operational audits? That is onshore pipeline regulations.
So yes. Now audits, those specific types of audits, there are some challenges around there, but in general, again, if you can break it down into requirements and requirements that can be measured or assessed for compliance, then we can support that. So If it's not a requirement, if it's something that's more challenging, like say you got to calculate some emissions, or you got to calculate some some numbers, there you might need to have additional systems that allow you to calculate emissions or distribution of gases, or spill kind of GIS software, things like that. But if it's a requirement and you want to assess whether or not you're taking the action, whether or not the action is having an effective result, we can definitely help with that. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So there's a question from Lukman. The question is that the compliance cost is high, and the market cost gets higher with compliance, and people tend to buy from companies that have poor compliance but low cost. So what does the federal authority do to ensure compliance in those companies?
So yeah, I mean, of course, but if we go back to that car example, if you solve compliance at its source, it should give you operational benefits. I mean, it's always about like the length. Like you can build something cheap and get it to market, and maybe you'll be successful for a while because it'll be a lower cost product. But eventually, it almost always catches up with you. I mean, the companies that have longevity, that really last a long time, they tend to build higher quality products because they want to maintain their brand over the long time. And you need to make that business case. What's the federal government? What's the federal authority in ensuring compliance across all manufacturing sectors? I mean, the federal authority is obviously divided in the same way that organizations are. So, there's the FDA for food issues. You got OSHA and EPA that's in the States, but it's similar in other countries. So they also have a divided compliance approach that makes it such that you don't necessarily have a robust, integrated compliance. There's no federal authority that's ensuring compliance across everything. It's all separated out. But you gotta understand, just like the car industry did, or at least the ones that succeeded did, that if you get compliance right, you're gonna save cost over time. Last Christmas, I remember an Italian company that makes Christmas cakes, and I'd always bought their Christmas cakes, really delicious. But they have a little bit of alcohol in them. They're these what are they called? Panettones, and they have a bit of alcohol in them. And they shipped all these Christmas cakes to Canada. And I went to the store and like, where's the Christmas cake? And they said, oh, they did an inspection, and the Christmas cake had alcohol content of 0.7%. And in Canada, at least, everything above 0.5% is considered alcoholic, and you need a special permit and taxes and so on and so forth. So all their Christmas cakes were stuck at the border. They ended up not being able to get them in for the Christmas holidays. They were returned back to Italy. And so obviously the company lost a whole bunch of revenue, as well as all these stores. Their clients were very frustrated because they didn't have the cakes to sell at Christmas. So there's a product issue where they didn't do a robust compliance program around the alcohol content in their cakes, and they ended up losing a whole bunch of money. So that's just an easy example where product compliance really matters. And we could go on and on with lots of examples. I have lots of other ones, but I just thought the Christmas cake was a funny one. And I really missed that Christmas cake last year because of the non-compliance of the Italian company. So anyways, yeah.
Great. So we have one last question, Jonathan. If you have any questions, please, now is the time. Otherwise, this is the last question that I have for now. How many people does an organization typically need to manage a compliance program?
That's a good question. I think there's no one size fits all. It really depends on your operations. In general, I would say companies are understaffed, and they're starting to realize that with these products that don't get to market, or with fines and penalties. But in general, they're understaffed. And talking to one large company that I think has something like 50,000 staff, and they had like 3 compliance people. I mean, it's just insane. And they end up paying for it. I mean, it's this classic example of like, Ford, I think it was Henry Ford, that said, if you don't buy a machine and you do stuff manually, I'm paraphrasing here, you'll find in a few years that you've paid for the machine, but you don't have the machine. And so it's the same in the compliance programs. Like if you don't implement robust programs and people, you'll find in a few years that you've paid for all of these non-compliance issues, but you still don't have a compliance program in place. So you got to get ahead of the curve. I'd say, like, let's just say it's at least one person per one person per 10,000 staff at a minimum, and one 10,000 staff per organization. That's on the low end. If you can do a bit more, but of course if you're in oil and gas, you need more than that. And but if you're in sort of other industries where there's less risk, less compliance issues, you can maybe do it with a little bit less than that. So you got to look at your risks, evaluate it, and then make an educated decision on how much resources you want to allocate. But you can automate a lot of it. I mean, that's the thing, is with software today, with tools, mobile auditing, if you're smart about it and if you're organized about it, you can get rid of a lot of the manual work. There's no need to comb through regulations yourself. There's no need to cut apart your permits yourself. All of that can be automated or purchased at a much lower cost than doing it internally.
Thank you, Jonathan.
And I see a question from Vic about CER operational audit questions. I'm not an expert on that, so I will also ask one of my colleagues who's more familiar with the oil and gas regulations to reach out to you and discuss that specific issue.
Mike, and if you would leave your phone number, that would be great. It would be much easier for us to reach you. Thank you. So that's all for the questions. It's 11:05. It's also time to end the webinar. So if you have any questions later, please feel free to send them to us at any time at info@mnemonic.com. If you want the slides, please do mention that in the post-webinar survey, the recording as well as the slides. We appreciate your feedback a lot. Also, it would be great if you can follow us on LinkedIn so that you will receive notifications for our upcoming webinars. If you're interested in Mnemonic, you can reach out to us at mnemonic.com, and you can also, we have attached a brochure in the handout section, so you can even have a look there. Thank you, Vic, for the phone number. So that's all for today. Thank you so much for joining us once again, and we hope to see you at our next webinar very soon. In a month or so, we'll let you know. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jessica. Have a great, safe, and compliant day. Bye-bye.